basin, what's being used in the basin, and what's being reported in the basin. And we have a lot of problems. We have, am I bothering you? We have a problem of not showing what's coming into the basin. And we have a problem with not showing what's being evaporated from the basin. An example is we had representatives that said people over the basin couldn't use an extra 25 acre feet of water, which really only would have been 20 because they already had 5 acre feet. Now we find out that we have more evaporation of water off of ag ponds than we had if those people would have been allowed to use water on their property. That's unacceptable. That needs to be looked at, that needs to be corrected. The world was going to end because a few people were going to get 25 acre feet of water. And now we find out that the ag ponds have more evaporation than what that water was going to fix. And we have too many agencies that are sitting here that aren't using all their water that we would call supplemental water that's not being used in lieu of pumping. That's unacceptable. That water should be used first. If you're not an overlier, you don't have the priority right to the first use of the water. You have to use your other waters. And that needs to be identified in all this stuff. And everybody's got to get out of their way of, it's going to cost me more. That's your problem. That's not the basin people's problem. We took a vote on AB 2453 on what we wanted to happen in this basin. And then we circled around and screwed those people with coming around the corner, having secret meetings and coming up with people to be on GSAs and different things where the people over the basin voted against them in the first place. This needs to come up to the surface and needs to be filtered out on what are we actually trying to do here? Spending money on projects that don't matter. I sent some photos to one of the staff members here on 5 months of water that was going into the Creston area that has never been recorded. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on items not on the agenda?
Hi, I'm Nancy McDevitt. I live in the north side of Paso, off Stagecoach and Creston, right in smack in the middle of a whole lot of vineyards. And I'm here to support the work of Murray Powell and the efforts of all of the people that I live around who are trying to survive with wells. Murray and I have gotten to be quite friendly with all of the problems that we have up in our area, but the biggest problem that we do have is the fact that our wells are going dry. 12 years ago, my husband and I moved here from the East Coast, and I know that we were hoping to develop the land for growing, as my husband is a chef, that's to be farm to table, and for a while it went really well until we all of a sudden were running out of water on very obvious times. I have emails and data that I will leave with you, follow-ups of every conversation with everyone, Miller Drilling, Filipponi, and the water suppliers who charge us for the water that they get from our basin and then sell it back to us. So A, we can't really grow on our property anymore. We haven't in 2 years. B, we have been told that we need to dig a deeper well, when A, they did not know that when we bought the house, how deep the well really was, which was 580 feet. They told us it was 500, and we had a pump replaced, all of this costing quite a lot of money, which I will quote in a moment, and telling us we had to go to 700 feet, and we're talking about 65 to 75,000. Okay, so what do we do? Last year, I sent an email to Murray saying, you know, I'm pretty much tapped out here. We woke up one more time, no water, around the beginning of growing season. had to order water from the container stop, and they brought it out happily. They brought us $500 worth of water. Unfortunately, we can only take $250 worth of water, so they drove away with the other 250 because you have to take the whole order. So I said, well, how are we going to do this? Why don't we get our second reserve tank? Great idea. Perfect. Okay, build the pad, get that all done, blah, blah, blah. Second reserve tank, done. Boom. Another $10,000 just to do that, to be sure that next time I order water, I can take the full order, which I had to do in, I want to say around early November, when they had the really cold harvest time and they needed to irrigate to save the, I guess that's my time. But the point I guess I was trying to make is that I'm buying water that comes from my own basin, and I was aware and have been made aware that a lot of the land around us, which when we moved here 12 years ago, was not developed for properties and for vineyards, much less vineyards for people who own them that don't even live in the state of California. So
Chair, do you want to allow the
Thank you.
comment to continue?
here to be a little pissed off, but I guess my time is up. So
Thank you very much. Any other public comment on items not on the agenda?
Hello, my name is Robert Erzin. I live in San Miguel. I'm a farmer. I have about 23 acres, about 15 acres under dry land farming. I moved here 10 years ago. There's a moratorium on irrigated agriculture. So I moved down here. I respected that. I went out there with, grafted bench grafted vines, planted in February, praying that it would rain. I got this vineyard to take. It's producing now, after 10 years, it's producing beautiful grapes. I would save my dishwasher and run out there in the summer, the stuff that when I would wash my dishes, go out there and water the grapes that were suffering because they just didn't have enough water. But I did it after 10 years. Same with my olive trees. I've got, 300, 400 olive trees that are no water, just fighting every, hot day and praying that it rains. And thank God the last 2 years we got some rain. And so I'm in a neighborhood, it's rural. We have some people with horses. Everyone's on wells. And then all of a sudden the county wants to put a cannabis operation back in our neighborhood, and they want to give them water. They want to give them, 3-4 acre feet of water to grow cannabis. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, I've been sitting here, I can't use water, and I respect the county's moratorium, when they said, hey, because people need water for cooking, raising families, showering, basic, stuff that what we call civilization. We have water for civilization, and now they want to give them water. And then I'm new at this. I'm not a city hall type of guy. I work 2 jobs, and I was at the San Miguel Advisory Council, and I was talking to, I forget who it was. There was somebody from the county telling me that they're gonna offset it with flushing toilets. They're gonna change out how much gallonage you flush your toilet, and you could put some emitters that reduce the water flow. And I'm wondering, how are you going to enforce that? And plus, we all know those toilets, you flush once, you got to flush it twice. So I'm just here to really question what's going on with the water in the basin. Again, I'm not here to fight City Hall and make a big deal. I'm curious. I'm learning more about this. I'm reading 223204, and I'm wondering about this offset. It's all Greek to me, but I'm really getting up to speed on it. And I'm just going to question everybody here to what's important. Cannabis, they can grow that stuff in Washington State, Oregon, anywhere where it grows. Why do we want it in this county? Why do we want to use our precious water for our families who just spoke, who had a business growing vegetables for us to eat, and we want to grow cannabis? They can grow that in Pennsylvania, where I grew up. They got all the water in the world back there, guys. Let's use common sense. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Any other public comment on items not on the agenda?
Murray Powell, Templeton, California. I just want to follow up real quick on Ms. McDevitt's comments. I didn't hear all of it. Anyway, I know her for a couple of reasons not related to water, but then also with her dry well, I got to know them on that part too. And you saw the folks that were here filming. They're doing a documentary on what you guys are doing, partially. And they actually, I was out at her place back in October, and they were filming her, interviewing her and her husband on their water problem. And at that time, their well was working. So on Thanksgiving Day, this last November, I got an email in the morning from her. Well, guess what? We got up this morning and our house doesn't have water. And she might have already, I might be repeating some of this, but sorry for that. But anyway, so Miller Drilling came out. They took a look. It wasn't a pump problem. It was a dry well. Their well's 580 feet deep. And Miller was proposing to drill it to 700 feet. And the estimate, I think she has it with her, I'll get it turned into you, was 60 grand, 60 grand. So that's for one well, one domestic well. You know me, I've been harping on you guys now for a long time about domestic wells, domestic wells. They don't have 60 grand. So right now, they do have some water because all of the vineyards on Crescent Road, they're up on Stagecoach, off of Stagecoach at the top of the hill, you know, aren't irrigated. But I can guarantee you that when the irrigation starts full bore here in the next month or two, they're going to be out of water again. And what are you guys doing about it? You know, I'm reading this GSP. I know it's going to be on the agenda. And I don't see hardly anything that's been accomplished by this committee or these GSAs going back 7 years. And today, there are more dry wells going as we speak.
Thank you. Any other public comment on items not on the agenda? Okay, not seeing any.
Mr. Chairman, could I respond just quickly? For the folks who came from the unincorporated areas, I think you know I'm Supervisor Bruce Gibson, county's representative here. If you'd like to contact my office, and I'll leave my cards with staff here, I'd be happy to discuss the various issues that you've raised up and give you a little projection of where we're headed in the future.
Thank you. Let's move on to item 6. Mr. Reilly, is there any response to previous public comments?
Oh, no, sorry. No, nothing to report.
Thank you. Item 7, a report on the round 1 grant implementation. So on all these items, we will hear the report, take public comment, and then have discussion.
Thank you, Chair. And I can take this one. So just a brief update on the Sigma GSP Round 1 grant implementation. We've been providing regular updates on where we're at on the grant and the invoice submittal. So as we reported at our meeting on February 7th, there was invoice number 6 had been submitted. And staff is currently working on the submittal of invoice number 7, which would cover the January through March 2024 time period. And then again, a draft grants implementation planning schedule is provided on the next slide, and I'll go to that. And as I pull this up, it's just something, a tool that staff is using to track everything that's in the grant spend plan. And this is something that we're reviewing and working with the PBCC GSA staff. So again, this is a draft schedule, and all the components of the grant are included on this schedule. And that's all I have to report unless there's any questions.
Great, thank you. So this is just a report item, but let's take public comment on this. If there's any public comment on this brief report item 7. Not seeing any. I guess I should have asked in the last one. Any online, Mr. Blakesley?
No, none online.
Bring it back to the board for any discussion, questions. So that just one brief comment to make. I know staff of all the GSAs is working really hard to, get all this going, but we do have a hard and fast end date by which we need to spend these grant funds. And it's April 1st of 2025, and it's coming up quickly. And we definitely appreciate the efforts that staff is making to, get all these projects advanced. And, maybe sometimes it feels like we're not moving as quickly as we'd like, but we're certainly trying to push forward on all of this as expeditiously as possible. Next, let's move on to item 8, Mr. Reilly. Or Mr. Blakesley.
Just a quick report item. So there's as many of you know, there was an RFP that was issued on January 12th for a cost of service rate study. And the pre-proposal meeting was held January 31st. Several proposals were received by the February 23rd deadline. There were also firm interviews on March 21st. And through that review committee selection process, interview and selection process, a firm has been selected, and that is SCI Consulting Group. And that's all I have to report on this item.
Okay, let's thank you. Open this up for public comment. Mr. Graywell?
Yeah, thank you. Greg Graywell. I'm glad we're doing a rate study. There's only 8% of the basin that's using 90% of the water. Why do you need to do a study? We know who's creating the problem. You're spending money on looking at blended water. You have no infrastructure to deliver the blended water. There's not one project on stormwater capture. We've had 2 great years. We could have captured stormwater and nothing's been done. And we're moving really fast. It's the 10-year anniversary of Sigma. You're not moving fast. I can give you a document from 2005 called the prior agreement, which all of you were part of. I guess I can hand out cards and you can call my office and I can tell you how you got screwed over. From the people that sued their own constituents over your mismanagement of the basin. You have water that's available and you're not putting it to beneficial use. And you're telling people that have water that's available to them that they can't use it. And you think you're doing a good job. It's ridiculous. I'm glad you don't manage my place. My place is perfect because you're not there. It's time to understand that you don't need 50,000 acres of grapes and use 20. I'm not against farming. I'm not against grapes. I need alfalfa. I need grain. I need all the other crops. I want our area to be productive. But you can't keep milking the cow that doesn't have no more milk. And you got to put the other things that make a difference. And you can't keep kicking the can down the road because you think if you do a project and the DWR goes along with it and they fund it somehow because you wrote a bunch of letters 4 years ago, that's a good project when it doesn't produce anything. And if you want the documents, I'll bring the documents. I got 20 years, 25 years of documents to show that all the entities that are here couldn't manage nothing. I wouldn't have you mow my lawn.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item 8? Okay, not seeing any. Bring it back to the board for any discussion or questions. Mr. Merrill.
Page to the topic of the rates. I haven't been all of the stuff strikes me that the way the signal law is written, there are certain provisions in the law for funding of ongoing expenses, separate capital projects. And I am hoping that our staff has thought about that, because I think that getting funding is going to be a lot tougher. Status state and getting into things that require complicated votes, time, money, effort, or vision, build, create a system. I think we ought to investigate the reason that's lower hanging fruit, why we should do something. I'm going to have Jerry, who sees on the staff, say, you guys discuss this, what keep the lights on funding close to capital.
Thank you, Blaine. Yeah, and thank you, Dana, for the introduction. I was part of the selection committee. Unfortunately, I was not party to the last interview last week, but I understood from that meeting that there was a discussion about ways to keep the lights on funding that we might be able to get to quicker than the rate study would provide. As I understand, the rate study will not be completed until January of next year. And then whatever comes out of that would be 218 funding or some other funding. So I understand that comment was made at that meeting. I'd like to understand if there are any provisions or any opportunities to bring us to keep the lights on type funding that does not provide for a vote that we can start implementing. This is many basins have done this for years now. And funding is such an important thing for groundwater management that part of the Sigma law allowed GSAs this special provision to keep the lights on or administrative funding. And I would sure like to see a way for us to get there a lot quicker than going all the way to the rate study, which ends up in January or February next year. So I would like to understand if there's an opportunity to move that portion of funding a lot quicker, because I think one of the things DWR will look at in terms of successful basin management is if you don't have a funding mechanism, it's going to be hard to justify how you're actually going to be able to do something and manage the basin. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, was there a cost?
So, yes, there is the cost. We're working on we're negotiating the contract right now, but there is a cost. I think it's, the quote was about 134,000, as I recall, somewhere in that range. And I would like to, given your permission, make some comments in response to Jerry's comments. Yeah. So the RFP, the request for proposals for the rate consultant, specifically requested that the rate consultant look at both the Prop 26 funding mechanism and the Prop 218 funding mechanism. The Prop 26 mechanism is what you're describing, the keep the lights on. It's specifically funding that can be used for administering the GSP, for monitoring the basin, for doing, I think, all the things that Jerry kind of puts in the category of keep the lights on. So the rate consultant will look specifically at what would a rate structure look like under that program, and then also what would a rate structure look like to fund our projects and management actions. And those require the Prop 218 process. Rate consultant is going to look at both of those, and we can work, staff can work with the rate consultant if there's a way to bifurcate those two pieces of the rate and do one quicker than the other. I mean, we're certainly open to that. We got to get them on board first so that we can explore those opportunities. But it certainly is something that we will, as a staff, be committed to. And Taylor just brought up, I said 134, but actually it's 108,000 is the quote.
180 or 10108?
108. Actually, it's $107,600.
Going down, keep talking. I like it.
And we're hoping, we're working on that. We're negotiating that contract. I was working on that today. We hope to have that executed hopefully next week.
So if I might, Mr. Chairman, clearly it was not on our agenda yesterday at the Board of Supervisors, so we haven't awarded it nor issued the notice to proceed today. So if we could just make that clear, but I hope we could get that at our next April 9th meeting, possibly.
Actually, because it's under the 200,000, we don't even have to take it to.
You don't have, okay, don't have to take it to the board. And I would just note, and I think all my colleagues here, representatives of various GSAs, understand that the Keep the Lights On funding has been provided over the 7 years that we've been doing Sigma on an ad hoc basis, GSA by GSA. I think that there's real good reason to regularize it. Right now, the county's contributions to this effort are paid out of our general fund, which is contrary to the policy that was set, that was the will of the board majority at the time. That has to shift eventually to the beneficiaries of the basin. That's going to be a process. But to make sure that it's fair among all basin users, independent of which GSA they land in, I think is important. And we, certainly committed to do it.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Okay. Moving on to item 9.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is just to update you on another project that is underway. This is the, as you recall, one of the data gaps and deficiencies that DWR identified in our GSP is our ability to evaluate the alluvial groundwater system and its potential interaction with the bedrock groundwater system. So we developed an RFP to install, and this is per our GSP, to install 8 additional alluvial wells that are along the alluvial system. The graphic up there on the slide shows you where the locations are. Issued the RFP in January of this year. We received proposals. Those were evaluated by a review committee made up of members of GSA staff and other stakeholders. Those now have been reviewed. A recommendation has been made for a contract award. That consultant is Cleeth Harris Geologists. That contract actually was finalized and signed earlier today. And so we'll be issuing a notice to proceed on that work probably sometime later this week or early next week. And again, just like the rate study I didn't mention, the funding for this work is grant funded, and the work to be associated with the rate study is also grant funded.
Great, thank you, Mr. Reilly. Public comment on this item 9.
Murray Powell again. Quick questions. So the dates on this table here are not correct, right? Is that correct? Because you just said you were just signed the contract today or something.
That is correct. The dates that are presented above were the dates in the request for proposal. It took a little bit longer to get through the process than we originally anticipated.
Okay. I assume the slide before this one also had a table that those dates were probably not the correct dates. I mean, okay. So my question is, why isn't the proposal or the proposal actually not disclosed in the agenda documents? Why can't the public see exactly what this entails?
When the contract is awarded, there will be a scope of work which is extracted from the proposal that will be made publicly available.
After it's already been signed, sealed, and delivered.
That's correct.
Why isn't it done the other way around? Why isn't there public notice as to what's going on here? I mean, maybe I shouldn't even be asking you this. Sorry, Blaine. But I don't understand. I mean, I don't even know what this really entails. I mean, to say that the alluvial well network expansion design and construction support services, I don't even know what that means. Does anybody? No. Let me ask another question. Has each of the GSAs reviewed all this information that I'm asking that the public see? And has each of the GSAs actually approved whatever this thing entails? This one and the last one?
Yeah, so
Yes, no, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Graywall.
Yes, thank you, Greg Graywell. I want to continue what Murray was talking about. The scope of practice on what was going to be asked for should have been given to the public before anybody bid on it. Then we would have known what they were bidding on. It's not about what the cost is. It's about what are they bidding on? Why can't you know what it is that you're asking them to do before you get a bid on what they're telling you that they're gonna get paid to do? And again, this has been the main problem. You got two agencies here that have no general manager, I guess they do have counsel. They have the same counsel for 25 years. And have no staff. And all of a sudden we have all these magically staffed people that nobody knows who they are. They come up with this stuff. And all it says is, oh, well, staff approved it. Everybody gets to see everything. And then we come to a meeting where it's already basically been approved. And then we're supposed to give 3 minutes of public comment on something that's already been approved and looked at by staff. And nobody knows who staff is. And nobody knows why wasn't this out first? Why wasn't there public comment on what was being submitted to be looked at, to be approved before the fact? We seem to keep putting the cart in front of the horse and then asking everybody to just go along with it and pay for it. And this is, I don't know how anybody else does business. I wouldn't do business that way. I wouldn't ask a guy to build me a house and then he gets to design the plans and I get the house that he built for me that wasn't the house I wanted, but I didn't get a vote on it. And at the end I got public comment, but it didn't matter because I still had to pay the bill. This is ridiculous.
Thank you, Mr. Graywall. I'll make one comment. I mean, we did at a recent meeting, and I'm not sure, I think it was the meeting before last, review the request for proposal that went out for the rate study. It was in the packet. We took public comment on it, and then we sent it out. And then we got proposals back in, staff evaluated those and selected one. The alluvial monitoring was further back. I couldn't tell you what meeting that was, but there's a process that we're trying to follow here. And the request for proposals are public documents in our packets.
That's correct. All of these proposals are published on the county's procurement website. Anyone can download them, review them. So yeah, they're available for public inspection.
Blaine, the RFP obviously was written by staff. Yep. Basic data in. That's what we need to have as a tool to understand what's.
Your mic's not on, John.
wasn't this person from Cleeth Harris at our last meeting? Was that the person that made the presentation, or was that another?
No, that was Joel Kimbleshoe from Land IQ.
Yeah.
That's
So-
on a item later in the agenda.
Yeah, okay. So he was basically explaining, you know, a little bit about what this is going to happen and how it's going to work to benefit the basin and get the data in that we got to know, basically. So again, I'm fine with what we have going on at this point with it, but just needs to happen.
Well, it is, if I might, Mr. Chairman, it is, you know, it is the business of this committee. And this was issued on January 11th, subsequent to action by this cooperating committee. And we, you know, that was public document, the scope of it. And it is a matter of efficiency for us to delegate to staff the business of selecting the proposal and moving it forward. These are technical matters that are rightfully the decision-making of the technical staff. It's the purpose and the business of this committee to direct staff to get the job done. So that's what we're doing. Yeah, it's just simply a matter of efficiency. So I think there's nothing improper about the way we do it. As Mr. Reilly indicates, the necessary documents are publicly available, and there's nothing to be. So I think we move on. This is you know, this is good news. Get this going. Cleeth Harris is outstanding organization that has done fine work in a number of different places in the county, including Los Osos, where I'm most familiar with. So, you know, let's move. This is all good.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the board?
Yeah, just to, and I would, right, board when this was discussed. So exactly what is this? Certain questions from the public.
So the you know, the DWR had a number of areas where they thought our GSP could be improved or better. And one of those was there was inadequate monitoring of the alluvial aquifer, which are the shallow aquifers that largely surround the stream systems of this basin. So, you know, there's not a lot of wells in the alluvial aquifers. They drop down. They're not generally very, you know, stable for production. So you really need dedicated monitoring. And this is going to design them, and then they'll be constructed, and all with grant money.
Okay, so looking at our implementation schedule, this is the alluvial design, and now move on.
I'm sure that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yep, exactly.
And we have a cost on this project?
Yes. Do you have that handy? 1 second. In fact, I just wrote this. Yeah, this is for this project, this phase of the project, $200,000. Not to exceed.
On future updates, let's put the cost on these slides. So, seeing no other comments or questions from the board, we'll move on to item 10. Mr. Reilly.
So this is another initiative, another project that is needs to be accomplished. It is funding from it will come from the grant funding that we have. What this is the technical advisory committee recommended that approximately 151 wells in the basin, existing wells in the basin, be brought into an expanded monitoring network. Those wells were identified in a technical memorandum, and then the next step is we need to secure permission from the landowners through an access agreement, where we can actually have permission to bring these wells into our expanded monitoring network. So we needed to bring a consultant on board to actually make contact and negotiate access agreements with those property owners, and that this is that work. So we solicited proposals, and again, I think that table is probably from the request for proposals, so those dates may not be exactly the way it followed, but they're pretty close. We solicited, we issued an RFP. Again, that RFP was posted in the county's purchasing website. We received proposals. The proposals were received on March 4th. Those proposals, we received 4 proposals, and those 4 proposals are currently undergoing review by a review committee made up of GSA staff and other departmental staff on the county. So I don't have a cost for you yet on that one. We haven't made a recommendation for contract award yet.
Okay, thank you. Public comment on this item 10.
Yes, thank you. Greg Grable. I'm on the Technical Advisory Committee for Expanded Well Monitoring. We identified the 4 areas that needed to be looked at last June. We had the funding, and here we are, the end of March, almost a year later. We had availability to hand out information before the fair and here, and it wouldn't have cost us nothing, but that wasn't done. This goes back to my kick the can down the road. Anybody wants to talk about what we should have done, what we could have done? We got 208,000 that we put another 70,000 in back in 2009 for AB 3030, which we were a part of CASGEM. We were supposed to do expanded monitoring back then, and it wasn't done after we got money from the DWR. Again, I have those documents. So this should have already been done. We already have properties that we own by the county. We have fire stations. We have other city and county properties that have wells. This should have been already monitored. We have the money for the equipment. Why hasn't it been done? Why do we have to wait? You don't need it. Do we need an agreement for the properties that the taxpayers own? I don't think so. You should have started with those first, and you should have went out to the areas where the problems are with the wells. We gave them all the well information from 2014 to the present on every well that's been replaced, the owner's name, the owner's address, what the well used to be, what the well went to. All they had to do was mail out something and said, who's in, who's out. We picked all these different wells, and here we are. We're just now going to send out an RFP to do something we could have done a year ago. I'm sorry. That dog don't run in my race.
Thank you. Any additional, Mr. Powell?
All the comments I had on the last slide basically relate to this one, so I don't need to repeat all of it, except I never did get an answer as to whether each of the individual GCAs have reviewed these RFPs and the actual completed contracted negotiations and so on. So I'm still waiting for an answer. And as you have all recognized, this committee does not have any authority to do anything, include approve any of this. So I'm wondering if each of these GSAs have been provided with all of this information up to today. And I assume these dates again are wrong, or not wrong, they're just probably out of date now, as to whether this RFP, as an example, has even been signed off as a contract or not. So it's the same problem. Did each GSA approve these RFPs yet? Have they even seen them? The final agreements, have they even seen them?
Yes, the answer is yes. Each of the RFPs are reviewed and modified through collaboration with staff members of each of the GSAs. Each of the GSAs are provided with the final copy of the RFP so that they can share them with their, with their members. But yeah, it's a collaborative process. All of the GSAs have been involved in developing the RFPs, in in reviewing the proposals that have been submitted, ranking those, and making recommendations for contract award. So, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I might,
Yes.
just one suggestion to staff is as we keep track, we're going to have a number of projects out that have been the result of RFP. It might be, and I think it would be definitely helpful to revise this table so that actual dates are shown, including the date that the PBCC directed staff to take action, the date that it actually got posted on the county's procurement website, at the actual date that it was issued. And if there are, maybe we could use shading to look into the future. If certain things like the notice to proceed haven't been issued, we can give an estimated date as to when that happened. I think that'd be helpful for PBCC members as well to keep track of progress here.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. Any other public comment? Or I guess we've already closed public comment. Any other comments or questions from the committee? Okay.
Just one regarding the GSA reviewing all this. I'm not familiar with our look at all. Maybe I'm kind of new there too, so maybe they have. So I'll need to ask that question.
Yeah, your staff member is Joshua. What's Joshua's name? Reynolds. Joshua Reynolds, and Joshua serves as your GSA staff member, and has participated in all of the reviews and selection processes.
Okay, appreciate that information.
Yep.
Okay, moving on to item 11. Mr. Reilly.
The very brief update. This was at your last meeting. You directed staff to develop an RFP for a state water project feasibility study. The development of that RFP is underway. We really have nothing else to report at this point, except that it's top on our list, and we're working to get it to you as quickly as possible.
Thank you. And that's probably a great example of this process that will come back to this board and be made public, accept public comment before it goes out.
Correct. And again, that RFP will be developed in collaboration with all the GSA staff members. They'll be happy with it before it's brought to you for your consideration.
Thank you. Any public comment on this item 11? Mr. Graywell.
Yeah, thank you, Greg Graywall. Okay, there's only one agency that's here that's a table A water contractor for state water. This year, the water is 15% of what that total project is, which most of the people don't even really understand what the hell I'm talking about. All right, we got water stored at the San Luis Reservoir. A majority of it belongs to the taxpayers that live over the land that don't get the benefit of that state water. You want to dump water in the Whale River, the water's been flowing in the Whale River for 2 months. It flowed over 5 months last year. If you would have done stormwater projects, you wouldn't have to worry about dumping 250,000 acre feet of water in a river that has water in it during the wet years. And you could have monitored what it was doing, but you don't have monitoring there. You put it everywhere else where it doesn't matter. The county is the water district for Shandon. They have a turnout they spent $1 million on. The last 4 years, they've used 0 state water when they could have used 100 acre feet in lieu of pumping, which would have took care of everything in that town, and they didn't do it. Why? Is that best management practice? I don't think so. Just like the other agencies don't use all their Nazi metal water. They're not doing best management practice while they're telling other people they can't use the water on their land. We don't need to build another turnout, dechlorinate water, dump it in a river during wet years that has water to monitor water that's going to be there in a wet year. If you look at our plan, we're going to talk about later, our annual report over the last 7 years, 4 out of the 7 have been wet years, better than the 3 drier years. Again, we didn't have any stormwater capture. We could have captured what we needed, but we didn't do it. We didn't do it because we're going to do another study and waste a bunch of money. That water at Shannon costs $2,500 an acre foot. The county's not using it because they don't want to spend 250 grand on 100 acre feet of water when they can pump it out of the basin for 30 grand. That's the bottom line. That's not best management practice, but that's what they're doing. They're going to spend the money on the homeless.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Ann Myrie I own property in the Shandon San Juan area, but I'm not a member of the GSA out there. I have a little different perspective, I think, on the availability of state water. The system is oversubscribed. Probably the allocation I'm most familiar with is Cachuma. I can't say what they've been getting for the last 2 years, but certainly they were a customer of the State Water Project long ago, decades ago. And 2 or 3 years ago, their allotment was equivalent to the evaporation off Lake Cachuma, which is a significant amount of water, but it's not going to solve problems in years of shortage. So I think it's worth looking at this feasibility. It's true Shandon has an allocation of 100 acre feet, but I don't think there are enough people in Shandon to use 100 acre feet. So it's understandable that they're not using it, and I'm pretty sure there are people that have not transitioned to municipal water. I can't say that definitively because I never talked to anybody out there. But an acre foot is certainly enough water for at least 4 houses. And I don't think there's 400,000 houses in Shandon. So maybe that water would be available to somebody else. But I think you can't count on getting 100% of what your allocation is ever. 1/5, I mean, Greg is exactly right. Right now they're telling farmers they can have 15%. And of course, farmers plan far earlier in the year than this. So with an allocation of 15%, they're not going to be farming all their land. And, this probably isn't the silver bullet that would solve the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment on this item 11? Mr. Powell.
Real quick question, and I apologize because I have no idea what this is about. Can somebody please briefly explain what we're talking about here in terms of what feasibility, what are we actually going to study here?
Yeah. This was a topic at our last meeting. We received a proposal and agreed to draft an RFP. So this is just a follow up to, you were at our last meeting.
Not everybody.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
Okay.
Any additional public comment on this item 11? Okay. Bring it back to committee. Any questions or comments?
Could just have Blaine explain what it is, basically.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mike.
So yeah, the purpose of this study, or the goal of this study, is really to determine whether or not state water project supplies that the county it has allocated, but in many years not fully used, can those supplies be used to benefit the groundwater basin, both the Paso Robles groundwater basin and potentially the San Luis Obispo Valley groundwater basin. In effect, the groundwater basins are the only 2 significant storage systems that are available to store water like last year, when state water project allocations were at 100%. If we could have moved our allocation we didn't have a place to put it. So this is an opportunity to evaluate, are there times, and we know there's not going to be many, there's not every year that there will be excess supply, but are there years when excess supplies do occur in this system? Can they be used to benefit the Paso Robles and potentially San Luis Obispo Valley groundwater basins? So that's what the study will evaluate.
Question.
Yes.
Yeah, Blaine, is it sort of like the agreement with San Luis Obispo County and Monterey that the NACI is not able to be banked? In other words, we have to use it that year and it ends that year. Same way with the state water. If you use it, you lose it. Or it can't be carried over, I guess is what I'm trying to make sure.
That's right, with one little caveat, and that is we have the ability to store some amount of that supply in San Luis Reservoir. So that's I think a little bit different than the NACI system, but that would be one difference.
Yeah, it's significantly different. We, new rules approved recently by the Board of Supervisors allow, I think, a considerable amount of storage. I think it's going to be a significant change. It also talked about the ability to do sales on various timeframes. And so there's a lot more flexibility. That's going to be a topic of conversation before our board in a measured and ongoing way over the next year or so.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay. So moving on to item 12. Is there an introduction required here, Mr. Blakesley, or should we take public comment?
No, we could go straight to public comment.
Okay, any public comment on approval of the meeting minutes from our last two meetings? Mr. Ray.
Jerry Ray, EPC staff members of this committee. On the February 7th minutes of the meeting, item 13, it talks about the discussion of the ET monitoring. And I just wanted to hopefully clear the record a little bit that the presentation that I gave was representing a recommendation from the staff of the PBC. This was not an individual recommendation or recommendation from EPC Water District. It was a recommendation by the PBC staff asking the PBC committee to approve the ET monitoring. So I just hopefully we can clear that up a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. I see the paragraph in question. Is this, Mr. Blakesley, is this something that we should not approve today and edit or edit quickly?
Is there, maybe if you direct me to the, if there was a specific sentence, maybe I can get your feedback on.
I think it's page 5 and the minutes there, 22 of the overall packet, second paragraph. Just says he is recommending, Jerry Ray. He communicated the recommendation of the PBCC staff.
Oh, where it says he is recommending the PBCC develop ET data for the basin, and you're just saying the change should be, he's presenting, or the PBC GSA staff is recommending, is that the change?
He notes that PBCC staff is recommending.
Yeah, we could just make that change.
You guys agree with that change?
Yes.
And I think we'll confirm this with the with council, but the official record of this meeting is the recording that we're making here. These are just a summary for convenience. We've gone through that in a variety of other places. As long as we have a sufficient quorum to approve them, I'm going to abstain on the February 7th meeting. Council also advises that you don't have to be there at the meeting to vote on it, but just to be clear, while I understand the actions taken there, I'll abstain.
Mr. Reilly, you had a comment?
Just one technicality. I would suggest that we refer to that as GSA staff each of the staff members is a staff to the GSA, not to the PBCC. So
Correct.
just a clarification.
Any other public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll accept a motion to approve the minutes for both these meetings with this edit as noted.
Gavin, makes a motion.
Second, motion and a second.
And just for the record, I'll formally abstain on this February 7th meeting, but vote aye otherwise.
And all others in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great. Okay, item 13. Mr. Reilly, will you introduce this item?
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll be taking this item, and Mr. Reilly will provide any comments as necessary. So just a quick background for you guys. On June 20th, DWR issued last year, not this year. We're not there yet. June 20th last year, DWR issued a statement of findings with an approved determination for the GSP. That determination, the approved determination, included recommended corrective actions. Additionally, DWR requires a periodic evaluation of the GSP at a minimum of every 5 years. And the due date for that first evaluation is approaching rapidly, January 30th, 2025, about 9-10 months away. So it's anticipated, so there's we have to do a periodic evaluation, and that's what we're going to be discussing today, and some of DWR's recommended corrective actions. The costs to develop and submit a periodic GSP evaluation, it's anticipated that those costs would be shared amongst the GSAs in accordance with the percentages in the MOA. We'll review a summary of DWR's recommended corrective actions, but the request today for this body is the recommendation is to direct the PBCC GSA staff to develop an RFP to prepare the GSP periodic evaluation and submit to DWR by the January 30th, 2025 deadline. So again, that's the ask today, and we'll go over those recommended corrective actions briefly. And most of these corrective actions, DWR has requested, again, that they be incorporated within the periodic eval. Okay, we discussed the background a little bit, so I'm just going to skip over this. This is all in your packet, so if there's any questions, you can have me go back to a slide. We discussed this. One thing is this is a periodic evaluation. This is not a GSP amendment. However, just a note here that GSPs can be amended at any time. So if you want to change some substantial things in the GSP, that can be done at any time. And then again, we talked about the 5-year requirement for the GSP periodic eval. Again, this is a draft timeline. You can see where we are today. Again, this discusses some of the dates that I discussed previously with DWR's initial incomplete determination, the revised GSP that was submitted by this group in July of 2022, and then again, the June 20th approval with the recommended corrective actions in 2023. Here we are today. You can see the gold bar is what I want to focus you in on. That's really the time period that we have to develop and submit a periodic evaluation. And we'll get back to a more detailed schedule in a moment. Again, the recommended corrective actions, there's 8 of them. These 8 are not those, but these show you the focus of those recommended corrective actions. So I'll just read them on the screen. There's the detail, there's a lot of text and it's in your packet. We won't go over those in detail today, but just on the action of focus, one is elaborating on the definition of undesirable results, reevaluating the well impact analysis and filling related data gaps, considering mitigation strategies, further explaining connections with the alluvial aquifer, continuing to fill data gaps, collect additional monitoring data, describing understanding beneficial uses and users impacted by interconnected surface water, explaining the monitoring network for ISWs, the interconnected surface water, refining sustainable management criteria to include the alluvial aquifer, and reconciling monitoring network module and the GSP monitoring network. And these are general areas of focus. The details are in your packet. Let me go on to the next steps here. So this is the near-term schedule that we want to address with you folks. So again, the recommendation first is to develop and issue an RFP, as I mentioned earlier, to hire a consultant to develop the GSP periodic evaluation while addressing DWR's recommended corrective actions and submit to DWR by the January 30th, 2025 deadline. You can see on the screen, the draft schedule shows working backwards, that submittal January 30th, and we're building in a month of to finalize the periodic evaluation. Prior to that, there would be a formal public comment period of about a month. And right now the schedule has 6 months for a consultant to draft that periodic evaluation. And you can see on the schedule, there'd be roughly 2 PBCC regular meetings to review progress on that periodic eval. And then of course, we would need to have some time to develop and issue an RFP and onboard a consultant. So that's the recommendation and the schedule on your screen. And unless Blaine, did you have anything to add? Okay, that's all staff had to report.
Thank you very much. Let's open this up for public comment. Mr. Graywell.
Yes, thank you, Greg Raywell. I know we need to do the evaluation. I don't have a problem with the RFP to hire a consultant to do it. What I have a problem with is we had 2 main corrective actions that should have been already corrected. One of them is the interconnectivity of our surface water to our groundwater. And for 75 years, our surface water from the Salinas River has been going to South County, and they've paid nothing for that water and created a problem to our recharge in our basin. That needs to be addressed. The only reason that the water's been flowing for the last 2 years is because we've had good rainfall for 2 years, and the Salinas River's been flowing because it's going over the dam. That still doesn't cause a situation of looking at what the dam did to the recharge. We have other recharge areas with the other main rivers. This is why the stormwater capture is so important. It needs to be looked at, and that's our 2 things. The county got 6 months before we got a notice that we had 2 deficiencies. They got a letter saying, hey, they had 11 things they were looking at, was sent to John Diodati, the acting person at that time that became the permanent person, and the county did nothing. And then we got a thing that said, hey, we got to correct these 2 things, the shallow well issue and the interconnectivity of the groundwater. Well, we identified where the shallow well issues are. Nothing's been done. We identified what the problem is with our interconnectivity. Nothing's been done. So I don't know what you're going to tell these guys. I met with Paul Goslin last year, March 28th, in his office in Sacramento. They want to know that we're doing what they recommended. Whoever was on the staff back when those things were happening didn't follow what the consultant said. And that same consultant did Santa Cruz and got approved for the things that we got deficiencies in. So the staff didn't follow what the consultant told them. This is a problem with not knowing who staff is and who's responsible for the extra 80 to 100 grand that we had to spend to fix those deficiencies in another year of waiting to get started on this project. You want to be on staff, you take responsibility for your actions. You want to be on the board, you take responsibility for your actions. If stuff's not being done, take responsibility for your actions. It's not up to the taxpayer to keep paying for you not to do your job because you wanted to be on some board. It's time to belly up to the bar and get the work done. And the work is easy if we're not looking at projects that can't be considered. And as far as the state water, well, I'll save it.
Thank you. Any other comments on, public comments on this item 13? Okay, seeing none, bring it back to the committee. So I have one question here, Mr. Blakesley. So the timeline here on the screen doesn't anticipate the RFP coming back to this committee for approval before going out, which would, push this timeline back. But I think, there's a lot of questions and desire to understand how exactly this process works. I think we should be real clear on that. If it's being proposed that it doesn't come back, let's be upfront about that. And if it is coming back, adjust this timeline to allow for that.
Well, I think that if this board would like to see the RFPs come back, which it sounds like you do, then we're going to have to schedule special meetings to make that happen and make those some of those we're going to have more frequent meetings to, at least while we launch all of these projects that we are working on right now. So I think that's the only way to do it.
Let me ask on this matter, since it's only a matter of 6 days between the notice to proceed and the May 22nd meeting, couldn't we push out that by a week? We could have PB, the various GSA staffs work on the get a proposed draft, indicate your interest in proceeding once the PBCC has said, we've seen it. And then you could sign the contract on May 23rd and issue the notice to proceed at that time. Does that complicate things?
No, I think the one clarification I'd like is we've been collaborating to prepare the RFP with GSA, between GSA staff. We have direction from this board to then publish that RFP. This board may not have seen it, your staff would have, but this board may not have seen the actual RFP. And then we publish that, and then we get proposals back, and then we bring those to this board for concurrence. If you want to actually see the RFP before it gets published, then I think we're gonna talk special meetings to make that work.
My thoughts, and if I might, Mr. Chairman, my thought would be to have staff proceed as you'd outlined here, come with the preferred proposal, negotiated to the price. Just say, here's what we're going to do, is just a check-in with us. That gets published in our staff report for the 22nd and proceed. And it's not, again, it's the understanding that we have delegated that responsibility to staff. This is a receive and file action, and we would trust staff to be sure that they're getting a proper product together for execution once they've just informed the PBCC what's going to happen.
And I would kind of agree with Gibson on this one too, that we can just shove this whole timeline down just a little bit, still make it happen, and the public then gets involved as well. So
and again, go ahead.
Well, and I think that's certainly reasonable. I will just note that is not what we did with the rate study. So with the rate study, we wanted to see and approve the RFP, and the nature of this project is quite different. This is much more like an annual report, and the content of this evaluation is going to be critical, but the content of the RFP is going to be relatively boilerplate. So I think, but if we're going to have a different kind of formalized approach for RFPs for different types of projects, we should probably develop a policy on, what that looks like or something. So we know when the RFPs come into the committee and when, the committee is being asked to just approve the selection of the final consultant.
And again, I only suggest this particular one in this particular case because of the very tight.
Exactly. That's why I agree with Bruce on this one too. It's just very, very, very close on time frame. And I think we have a little bit of slop on the end to make things happen still. So.
Understood. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. I'm supportive of that. Any other comments or questions?
Just real quick. So I see we have $300,000 budgeted for this in our new budget.
There's an item, I think 2 items from now there, the budget will be discussed. Yeah.
Okay. And then it's pretty interesting stuff, but I was looking at the GSP assessment staff report, page 92, where it had staff recommendations. And I think there were 8 corrective actions. Are these all a work in process? I mean,
Yeah, many of them are. I mean, that you see the alluvial well, the things that we just talked about today. Much of this work, the expanded monitoring network, some of the other things that we were talking about today and in previous meetings, those are all, some of those are associated with addressing those issues that DWR identified.
Okay, one of them that really jumped out at me was recommended corrective action number 1. Department staff recommended the GSAs explain the selection of 10% of all wells going dry as considered undesirable.
That is something that will be considered as part of the evaluation. I think that is very likely a sustainable management criteria that will very likely be modified, but that's to be determined.
Okay, well, is our direction clear on this item?
It is, yes.
Okay, so do we need a motion to make this recommendation or?
Discussion. Yeah, I'll be making a motion then if you want then to go ahead and direct staff to develop an RFP to prepare groundwater sustainability plan, periodic evaluations, and submit to California DWR by January 30, 2025.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, next item, item 14.
I got it. Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to just make some introductory comments, and I'm going to ask Jerry Ray to come up, and he's got a presentation I think he'd like to walk through with you. At the last meeting, the board directed staff to solicit a proposal from Land IQ, and that Land IQ is the firm that made the presentation to this board at the previous meeting. Solicited a proposal from Land IQ for a one-year project or one-year term to provide the services that he had described with regard to evapotranspiration and using that for estimating agricultural water consumption. That proposal has come back. Jerry Ray, I think, is going to walk you through that proposal and some of the details. We can leave this. I guess you do have a slide deck that you're going to go through, right? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry Ray. I guess I'd like to clear up at least what my understanding is. At these meetings, we hear frequently that things are being referred to the staff. It's my understanding that the PBC staff is an official organization. Each GSA appoints a member to comprise the PBCC staff. That is a construct that I think it's actually listed in the MOA. The PBC staff advises this board. My position, I am not a GSA staff person. Actually, I happen to be a member of the board of directors of that. So I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding when we say PBC staff, we're referring to those 5 appointed people, myself, Willie, Blaine, Christopher, and gentleman from San Miguel. So I use that in a very specific reference to what PBC staff is. Okay. So I thought it would be useful just to go back briefly and review the last meeting, February 7th. I spoke as a representative of the PBC staff made approved them and wanted to bring before the PBC committee a vote to authorize ET monitoring and select Land IQ as a sole source. Slide. So I'll just go through very briefly the things we talked about that last meeting. Again, the staff has asked for authorization, asked this committee for authorization. We discussed a little bit about metering, its limits, timing, and expense. A brief overview was made of the ET was presented. We also talked about an engineering review of all the potential suppliers of ET monitoring. And a conclusion was made out of that Land IQ Land IQ is well qualified to be a single source for doing ET monitoring. Some of the benefits of Land IQ, they're a turnkey supplier. They do everything. We would contract with them, and back from them, we would receive parcel level type details of ET in the basin. Land IQ offers a path. We're talking about months, not years. If we chose to do some sort of monitoring program, we're talking about years. Monterey's been doing monitoring for 20, 25 years. We could have chosen monitoring back when this whole thing started, and we'd be 5 years into this, but we did not choose monitoring. So we're getting to the place now where we must move forward with something that's useful today. Next slide. Also part of that meeting, Joel Kimbashu, president of Land IQ, made I think a very detailed presentation about ET technology and Land IQ as a company. There was, I thought, a pretty good public discussion following that. Again, the PB staff affirmed their recommendation, and the PBCC had a discussion. Next slide, please. So back to the PBC committee. The committee was concerned about cost and a 3-year commitment. Certainly valid concerns. I believe the motion in reading the minutes says that the item was referred back to the staff asking for a 1-year contract with Land IQ. I'm happy to report that we do have a proposal back from Land IQ. Their normal mode of operation is a minimum of 3 years. Then when they start all this, they want a 3-year contract. They listened to us, our request, and they came up with a proposal that says, yes, we will commit to a 1-year contract. They would love to have the second and third year. The first year of the contract that is presented as $98,000, which is all the preparation necessary for them to start in the next few months to start developing ET monitoring for the basin. The second quote they submitted is for physical weather stations. They're very specific weather stations that Land IQ uses, and they are proposing 4 eddy covariant stations, and don't ask me what those are, and 2 surface renewal stations. And the cost of that proposal is $98,600. Those stations, the request we made to Land IQ was that the county wanted to own those stations, but Land IQ, and that's fine with Land IQ. It's a little different than they normally operate, but they would service and maintain those weather stations for us. So I think this is a very, very reasonable way for us to get started on ET monitoring and extraction monitoring. I think it would put us in a very good light a year from now when we're submitting this proposal or our 5-year review back to DWR to be able to say, actually, we've moved this from a proposal to something we're actually doing. So I think this is an excellent opportunity to get going on something, and I would beg this committee to move forward on this.
So I'm going to go off of public comment, but one quick clarification. So the optional year 2 and 3 are another story, but the upfront costs for this year would be grant funded.
Probably, and my caveat that we identified in the grant spending plan that the grant would cover the cost of 2 climatologic stations. This proposes 6 climatologic stations. I just need to clarify with DWR that we could expand that number of climatologic stations. Yeah, I believe that they would be agreeable, though.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a comment back to the 1 year. Land IQ is certainly hoping for the second and third year, but they're willing to work with us, deal with us. They think they can provide a lot of benefits for us, so they would be willing to sign a one-year contract.
Yeah, Jerry, I got a question for Jerry.
Sure.
As I remember in his presentation, he was, I think, quoting accuracy up to about 80%, I think is what I remember. I'm not sure exactly what that was, but to me, it sounded like a great cost per acre to monitor, the whole basin. And I think I remember asking questions about how accurate his data is. Can you recall what he was?
No, I don't quite recall that. I'm not sure this is something that lends itself to a cost per acre. It's a basic building block and tool for the basin.
Right.
That we have to do. And it's going to cost some money. And I think we've got this down to a place that's a number that's very reasonable. I think Blaine has been working on this and believes that there's money to be found in the grant. But it's something we have to do. So and this is a good opportunity, as I said, to move it from we're thinking about doing it to we're actually doing it.
Yeah,
So
I was gonna say, I see it roughly about 350,000 for the 3 years with all the materials, all the data. That's about what we're looking at for a 3-year contract. If we were to go that far, about 350,000 is what I see for numbers that are quoted in his proposal. So again,
is there a question in that? I'm sorry, I'm having trouble here.
Yeah, it wasn't really a question. It was just an observation that, his proposal all laid in, everything done, should be about $350,000 for the 3 years if we do all 3.
This, I guess this is what we're asking to commit to now.
Right, exactly.
So, Mr. Reilly.
I would just like to make clarification. There is a proposal that is in your packet, and that was the one that was provided by Land IQ about a week ago or so. The numbers that Jerry is presenting here are from a revised proposal that was received last night. So there's a difference there. So these are, I think, according to Jerry, these are the most current numbers. And I don't think you've seen the proposal that was received last night, nor have all of the GSA staff.
So I want to go out for public comment. We could bring it back to the committee to discuss further. I mean, but I'll just say, you're absolutely correct, Mr. Hammond. I mean, there was a discussion at the last meeting about, the precision of the system and the ET monitoring measures, evaporative loss, not water pumped, but there's a connection there, and it's not perfectly precise, but it's good enough for our purposes, and it's really the only way we can efficiently cover the basin with real data quickly. So let's open it up to public comment, and then we'll bring it back. So any public comment? Thank you, Mr. Ray. Any public comment on this item 14?
Yes, thank you. Greg Raywall. I was at the meeting, and his proposal was for 3 years for $340,000. So I'm sure the price changed because he wanted to be guaranteed if they were going to put equipment around the fields, they were going to get paid for the equipment. So maybe that's why this proposal is a little higher. He also said they don't monitor the ponds, and they don't monitor the golf courses, and they don't monitor a whole bunch of other stuff. And you're looking at applied water, not pumped water, like you just mentioned. So it's not 100%. In fact, it says an estimate. Why don't you just say it's a guess? It's a guess on, are they using the right amount of water on the crop? That's why the crop duty factors for what's being irrigated is so important, and what's being done. But if you're not going to measure some of the pumped water to clarify that the estimate on the applied water, because you're not accounting for the evaporation in the ag ponds or any other evaporation. Obviously, he has to take in precipitation and what's coming off the other grounds, but they're only putting their equipment around the ag fields. My other question is, are the other GSAs that have no ag, San Miguel, I'm not sure about Paso Robles. I know there's ag in the Paso Robles city limits. How are you going to figure out the percentages of who's paying for what? I don't think San Miguel has a vineyard in the middle of their town in the CSD. I know that Paso Robles does. I know they have 4 golf courses. So I don't have a problem with this guy's deal. It's an estimate on what's being evaporated, but I got a problem with not knowing what's being pumped. So you got part of the equation. You don't have all of the equation. And if you want to true know what's going on and who's over pumping or who's under pumping or who's doing what, you're going to have to figure out the rest of the equation and have some way to back up what's being told. And if you're going to go for the 1-year project and you don't get the rest of the stations and then they're purchased later on, the first year is not going to be a true example of what they could do, because they're not going to have all their climate stations around to tell you that information. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Myrie.
Anne Myrie again. I don't want to advocate for or against this, but I will say with regard to Land IQ, we have had some experience with their monitoring in another basin. And I think sometimes their findings need to be ground truthed because they have picked up oak tree canopies as irrigated. In one instance, we have some land that has never been irrigated ever that was picked up. I know you're looking at this as a money-saving device for individual growers because they won't be putting in water meters, but certainly water meters are accurate if they're calibrated. So, like I say, I'm not going to advocate, but I do think there'll be some need for ground truthing. And as individuals who are farming, you should be proactive just in case you find yourselves. The problem is if at some point maybe you're going to allocate irrigation water or charge for irrigation water, you want real numbers. So I'm just cautioning you about that. I think this is a board decision, not a, but whatever, for what it's worth.
Thank you. Additional public comment on item 14.
Murray Powell again. Yeah, I was at the last meeting. I thought I learned a hell of a lot about ET at that meeting by, I forget his name, the Land IQ owner. I think he spoke for more than an hour and it was very interesting and learned a lot. But what I took away from that, and you guys already know this, I think you were all there, was that first, like Greg mentioned, it does not calculate gallons or acre feet pumped. And he also mentioned that they try to track their systems with actual in-system gauges on at least 10% of the parcels that they are surveying, and that there are error factors of between 10 and 65% between the actual measurement of gallons pumped versus their reports, which shocked me. But in any event, I thought it was very clear that ET might be helpful for certain things, but it was not going to contribute to determining the groundwater extraction pumping problems and actual calculations as to who's using what water and how that's going to end up being at some point, God forbid, but it'll happen, some point turn into probably a sigma reductions of pumping for a lot of ag owners. So I'm not sure that spending this kind of money on a system that isn't going to give us what we are looking for, and he agrees with it, the owner agrees that it doesn't, And I think this is just going to turn out, if you want to adopt this system for your monitoring, that it's going to turn into a political football. It's going to be who's favored, who isn't. Everybody, land use lawsuits coming up, and so on with all of these errors. So I think you guys need to look at this and use your money in another way to actually start implementing reliable monitoring of the groundwater pumping that's going on here today.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Mr. Lohr?
Jerry Lohr, just very quickly, I think we ought to continue to study this. This is one of the most effective ways of giving us the best data that we can get. And so we've installed a CMIS, a California Irrigation Management Information System, on our property, and of all the various ways and the potential accuracy of what we could do, I think we should have at least one more meeting and study. There have been questions brought up by many people about this, and let's let him ask, let Dr. Kimmelshue ask those questions. So I would not say no at this time. I'd say let's continue to study it and all of us learn more.
Thank you. Any additional public comment on item 14? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the committee for discussion and questions. Mr. Merrill.
Yeah, I mean, I believe we need to make progress. To hold out for every well to be metered, it's a long battle, convincing effort to get folks to do it. This is heavily used by some big districts in the valley right now around the Tulare Basin. And there were a number of skeptical farmers over there that went ahead with metering despite this. And for a few years, the way to me is that at least half of them just said it's not worth spending money on metering. It's close enough that it's doing the job. So the vendor is looking for people who want to supply water meter data compared to what they're coming up. Some of us measure every single drop we put out of the ground. So I know I, for one, would be happy to make sure we compare the acres that are being irrigated to what they calculate it is and go from there. See if it needs to be trued up. I think they have experience with it. But I think to wait for the absolute perfect system, and this may seem like a lot of money, but we've got a lot of acres to go out and do this. I know what we spent just keeping track of all the meters we have and getting them into a database and making sure they make sense. I mean, if one full-time person, it's going to be $100,000 a year that's working. So there's one person right there. That doesn't include the rest of it. So you can't do a heck of a lot for $98,000. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but unfortunately, that's the way it is. So I wholeheartedly think we ought to get going. So there's a few things. Means I don't always agree with everything some of these people say, but I do agree with one general type. We need to get going on stuff, get stuff done soon. It's been long enough. It's enough years since this thing got passed. We need to make some concrete progress. Now, disagree on what the progress is, but I think we need to move forward. And I think this is not a this should not be a controversial choice. I thought an excellent presentation. He's willing to adjust how he gets the money to fit what we have. It doesn't mean it's going to be paid for forever, but we've got a lot of decisions to make down the road. The next item is going to talk about. Down the road, we're all going to have to decide how much we're going to do and are we willing to pay for it. And we're going to sit around here and say, well, God, we better not do this, we better not do that, because we're going to wait and see if somebody's going to come in and pay for our dinner before we order it. We're going to have to step up and agree it's going to cost some money and agree we're going to have to work on it, get it done. Now, the sooner we get going on it, the sooner we can support them, compare water meters to what their calculations are. And I think there'll be a number of people that'll be willing to help with that. So I really believe we need to, we need a motion to approve this thing. I'm going to say, I would so make a motion if we still need a motion to do this. I'm not sure where we are at this one. I think the modified system that fits our finances better should be approved, and I would make a motion.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Some more discussion, Mr. Burke.
Yeah. So one question I have is, what is the value of 1 year monitoring? Because when I look at some of these tables in the annual report, I mean, there's huge variances from a wet year to a dry year. And it seems like it needs to be a long-term deal to really make it work. And then my next question is, do we have the 10% wells to use as a verification to the accuracy to see, what we're really getting? Is another question. And then in terms of the cost, I represent San Miguel, and cost is an issue. We got 900 people that pay the bills for everything we do. So it is a cost. Maybe not the cost of the county or so the big ag business guys, but to our community, all this stuff is a cost. And that's why I always ask, what's the cost? What's the budget? What's going on? Because again, it's a cost to our community. Although we're small, but it is a cost. So that is a big factor to me. But I think kind of agree with Mr. Lord that maybe I'd like to get that gentleman back. And we do have to have questions. Is 1 year or 3 years really going to be that much of a value? Because I'm really not seeing it just based on the information and how it's calculating and the variances that, I don't know how we generate information from these tables, but they're huge, huge variations. Where, we had a big wet year last year. This year is pretty decent. What's next year going to be? Who knows? But to track it for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, I don't know really what that's going to tell us.
Yeah. So I have a couple of comments and I'll try to answer some of that. I mean, for sure, this is, something like this needs to happen on a long-term basis. I think at our last meeting, the discussion of asking for a 1 year proposal was with the hope that that can neatly be folded into the grant. But for sure, something's going to need to happen on a longer term basis, and the future costs are going to be borne proportionately by, at some point by extractors, not just by agencies, right? That's what we expect to finalize with the rate study when that comes in. So, the goal is to make this as fair and equitable as possible, and that, those who pump more are paying for more of the cost of all the management of the basin. But it's certainly a little more challenging on a temporary basis, especially for San Miguel. I appreciate that. I think that, this Land IQ service is being used, as Dana mentioned, all over the state, including by DWR, for a lot of Sigma compliance purposes. I think it's not perfect, but it's pretty close. I think I have some familiarity with the instances that Ms. Myrie was talking about in Cuyama, where there was kind of a scaled back version of Land IQ that was used without ground truthing. So, I think that at least the original proposal included a ground truthing component where we would, they think they get close to 97% or something accuracy when they've ground truthed it and calibrated the system, which, whether that's 90% or 97 or whatever, that's good enough for what we need. And no one's pretending it's perfect. So I'll certainly support a motion when we get there. Mr. Hammond.
So I have a question for staff on actually if we can do a motion because it's not really agendized that way. However, to me, this is an excellent tool, kind of like the third leg of a stool here, where we have groundwater monitoring from wells. We have the ET data. It's the whole package that we need to use to get somehow to be understanding how to regulate it properly and fairly. So, I'm in agreement that this is probably going to be, in my opinion, something we need to do continually. And I know that Joel had an excellent presentation. I think all of us heard it, a lot of us anyway. And I don't know what in my recommendation, I would say if we have to go out to an RFP instead of a sole source type of condition, I mean, we can do that, but I'm not sure how staff, if we can take any action at this point, because it's not really agendized. It was just more of a presentation, I think, at this point, correct? Joel, yeah. Really?
Well, the action really would be taken by the county. The county, because we are, we hold the grant, we would be the contracting agent. The reason this was broken up into the multi-year was, as Matt said, the first year could be funded through the grant. So the two costs there in the larger cost, the 98 in quote 1 and the 89.6 in quote 2, those could be rolled together into a single contract that could be funded through the grant. The question then gets to be from the county's perspective is, can we go through the sole source process? Can we go through the non-competitive bidding process? And I've had a conversation with Land IQ. I've had a conversation with Jerry Ray, who's kind of been the champion of this. And I think we can go through the non-competitive bidding process. We just need to be able to justify it, that it is a unique package of service and product that no other vendor really can provide. We can do that. We really don't need any off this agenda item. We don't need your direction to do that. We can do that. And I'm willing to do that. We just are going to need, I would ask Jerry and I think you're working with Willie on this, Shannon San Juan EPC, to provide us the justification that it is in fact meets the criteria for a sole source procurement. And I'd be happy to, subject to your concurrence, happy to move in that direction.
Very good. Okay.
I'm fully supportive of this. It is the state of the art. And I think this is one instance where San Luis Obispo County usefully can look outward and see that it's happening. The Tulare Basin example, I think, is instructive. Those that comment that this only gets a piece of the information needed are correct. This measures consumptive water use, but there is a methodology that gets from consumptive water use to a very accurate estimate of applied water and thus pumped water. And so those things are all studied. We had a presentation of this in Los Osos. I think our county has an ability to bring in some new thinking on this that further will refine this by looking at the soil moisture balance equations. And I think we're in the process in Los Osos of heading, I think, toward a hybrid system that's going to make it even more accurate. So it is absolutely something we need to get going with. We absolutely do need to ground truth it at a point. I would make two observations. One of them is that as it stands with the sort of, how shall I say this, the standard methodology of going from consumptive use to applied use is certainly good for measuring relative uses of water on different parcels. And that, as it gets wrapped into our overall program of dealing with supply and demand, I think we're miles ahead with just that. And then to my friends from the San Miguel CSD, I would note that under the very likely assumption our first year is funded by grants, your costs for years 2 and 3 would average $2,200 a year at your 3% contribution,
right,
which I think is a very high value return on understanding the considerable water use that surrounds you and affects your jurisdiction. So I'm fully supportive. I'd be happy to support the motion.
One more question, real quick. So I know that the new cost information is different from what was in our packet, but they're pretty close. But one paragraph on here, because it had $177,600 for a 1-year deal. But then it said, attached to the Land IQ scope does not include costs for 5 or 6 ground truthing stations to be owned by the basin. required to be calibrated. The monthly analysis, which Land IQ estimates would cost $130,000. So where is that?
And that is the discrepancy that I pointed out earlier, that what's in your packet is a previous proposal. And I think there, as it was described to us from Land IQ, there was a misrepresentation. And that's what the numbers that Jerry's presented up here. These come from a more recent proposal, corrected proposal, and are the representation of the accurate costs. So,
Okay, so the 5 or 6, is this for 5 or 6 stations?
this would include 6 stations. So that's quote 2, 6 stations, and then quote 1 is that first year service. And it's the same service that's described in the proposal that's in your packet. And our apologies, we just got the amended, corrected proposal late last night. So
Right. Well, that gets to the 177.6, which is actually in here. And then the two, year 2 and 3 are separate. But I would just, again, that 130,000, that just sort of went away. Is that?
yeah, the 130,000 is actually included in that 177, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not, I think there's consensus here that we want to move forward with, certainly with the 1 year. Sounds like it's unclear what exactly you need from this committee.
I think, well, I would suggest Dana's proposal to direct staff to proceed with the proposal as presented.
And confirm that it's sole
and
source.
confirm that we can
Right.
sole source it, so we
Right.
don't have any further complication. I would second that motion, should it be made.
Is that your motion, Mr. Merrill? Okay, so I have a motion and a second.
And discussion.
Yes.
Maybe we might want to also include, again, 2 and 3 years, because again, with only, I mean, it's really worthless, I think, in my opinion, for just one go around.
I would be comfortable indicating our commitment to years 2 and 3
Right.
At this point.
Was there any kind of a language that needed to be agreed to in the beginning for option 2 and 3, or?
Yeah, what we can do is we can write the contract for a base contract for the first year with a right to extend it for 2 additional years, subject to those terms.
Yeah.
And then as year 2 comes about, we'll already be hardwired to extend the
Just
contract.
extension, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, so motion, second, clarification, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay, motion carries.
I didn't understand the motion. What do you exactly approve? First of all, you got a new proposal that nobody's seen. What did you just approve? Exactly.
He doesn't have standard for
Yeah.
a point of order. Let's move on.
Okay, so item 15.
We're
Reilly.
not gonna answer that. Oh. Wow, you guys are really at it today.
Would you like to move on to item?
Yes,
next
please.
item?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take begin this item, and then we'll be have Nate will hobble up and take the rest over. On February 21st, the draft water year 2023 annual report was distributed to stakeholders via email and posted on the county's website. We did receive some comments by the March 15th due date, and those were reviewed by the PBCC committee GSA staff, and the comments and staff responses are included in Appendix L of the annual report. Some of the comments were incorporated as revisions to the annual report, as indicated in the Appendix L. You can see the staff responses, and then and changes incorporated in the annual report are shown. There's a red line version in your packet, and a clean version was also distributed. A summary of the water year 2023 annual report will be provided on the following slides, and Nate Page will lead that. And the staff recommendation, what we're asking from this committee is to submit a motion to submit the water year 2023 annual report to DWR by the April 1st deadline. So now I'll turn it over to Nate, and then we can come back to it.
Thank you, Taylor.
Don't
So
fall
yes,
over.
I'm steady up here. I got everything that I can hold on
There you
to.
go. Hang on.
I'll be fine.
Okay.
Thank you for your concern. Yeah, my name is Nate Page with GSI Water Solutions. We've been preparing the annual reports for the last few years. And so here's a brief outline. First of all, why are we doing it? DWR regulations. And, each of these following bullets are basically components of what is required in an annual report. So, yeah, and as Taylor just said, next Monday here, April 1, we've got to, if we want to be on time, submit this annual report. So let's start with precipitation. This was a very wet year, water year 2023, in comparison to the most recent years leading up. And for clarification, a water year begins on October 1 and continues through September 30th of the following year. So what we see here on our slide is numerous precipitation stations located throughout the basin with, in blue. Here, I'll point to this slide because everybody can see that. Never mind. Okay, it's worthless. Anyway, the blue font is indicating the total in inches of precip for the year. And this station here, the NOAA one in the city of Paso, 28.59. That's almost double the average annual precip. Next slide, please. So this is a different way of looking at this year's precip. The bar all the way to the right-hand side of this graph, showing the 28.59. And that's in comparison to all the previous years in these blue bars going left. And then this horizontal blue line here showing the annual precip, or the annual average as measured since 1925. And then in terms of water year type, so that's like, was it a dry year, average, alternating, or wet? This is a historical record of drought and wet periods interspersed with periods of average and alternating. And of course, water year 2023 was a very wet year, as indicated here. Next slide. So moving on to groundwater elevations. As a result of large precipitation in water year 2023, we may expect to see groundwater elevations increase throughout much of the basin. And indeed they did in certain areas. I'll show you some groundwater contour maps for spring and fall in the Paso Robles formation and some hydrographs. And a quick note, we're only looking at the Paso Robles formation in this annual report because of a deficiency in monitoring in alluvial aquifer. So as discussed earlier. So here's the spring 2023 groundwater contour map. In general, you can see greater groundwater elevations represented by these contour lines around the perimeter of the basin, adjacent to the recharge areas and the contributing watersheds, and then flowing downhill towards this low point in the northwest part of the basin. And then fall 2023 is a very similar shape, but you can see that these water levels are all just typically, as every year, just a bit lower than the spring water levels as we are further away from the big recharge of the previous winter. All right, so walking through a few hydrographs from our 22 Paso Robles formation representative monitoring wells. Here's one, 16K05. This one's located in the San Miguel area. And you can see that, oh, there's a lot going on this graph. So once again, just like the precipitation graph I showed earlier, we have this background color scheme of dry, average, and wet years. So that's the, the buff color, blue and gray stripes here. The water levels on the well are represented by these blue dots and dashed blue lines connecting. And then these horizontal lines here on the right-hand side of the graph, these represent our measurable objective for the well. So a water level that was identified in the GSP as essentially like our goal for this well, like where we want to see these water levels kind of level out by 2040. And then the red line, that represents our minimum threshold. So that's the line below which we don't want to see water levels drop. Now, as specified in the GSP, the way we measure that each year is we take an average of spring water level and the fall water level, and that's represented here by this purple triangle. So this well is looking pretty good. We do have some long-term decline in groundwater levels from the 90s, but in this recent last couple of years, we actually see a bit of a rebound, and we're still actually above our measurable objective. In this case, it's 16K05. Let's go to the next slide. So this is in the Shandon area, 20B04, a representative well there. All the same things apply on this slide. This is an example where we've been pretty steady since about 2015 with some ups and downs, but we are hovering between the measurable objective and the minimum threshold in the case here. And next, 14H01. This is a well located in, I think, the city of Paso near the airport, as you can see on this inset figure. And yeah, this one's got quite a history of historically much higher water levels. But then by the time we were to 2015, when Sigma started, we've actually seen water levels maintain pretty well around that general level. Now, last year, we actually did have our little purple triangle last year on this well was just slightly below the minimum threshold. So it's really nice to see some good rebound in this well after the big recharge events in water year 2022. Next. Okay, now we're moving into kind of the biggest problem area we have in the basin, this El Palomar Junction zone. This area has very limited recharge, very limited watershed contributing to this area. So, and that's kind of borne out in these water level data. 13NL1, we actually have a below the minimum threshold average water level in water year 2023 for the first time in this well. And similarly for the next one, this one's just a bit further south and east, 30J01. This well is, below the minimum threshold substantially. And one more, 28F01. This one's kind of been the thorn in our side for the last few years now. As you can see, this well is actually dry. So the actual water level may be below these measurements here. This is just a tag on the bottom of the dry well. So, and if you click one more time, this is what's known as an undesirable result as defined in the GSP. So when a average of the spring and fall water levels falls below the minimum threshold for more than 2 years. So that has triggered a study going on a couple of years now as specified in the GSP to understand that issue. And that's really kind of wrapped up in the work of the expanded monitoring network. So that is all in progress. Groundwater extractions, this is really the meat on the bones of what DWR wants to see in these annual reports. So We're reporting metered municipal well production, an estimate of agricultural extraction. It is estimated because, even a good metering program, you're still going to have probably in the neighborhood of 10% error. So in this case, we used a satellite-based method, and it is the best practice we have at the moment. And then also we have an estimated rural domestic Gulf small public water system extraction. Here are the numbers for 2023. I will note that these are all across the board, actually substantially lower than the previous year. And I think that's just an indicator that, a lot of these water use sectors actually service irrigated landscaping or agriculture, of course. And with high antecedent soil moisture as a result of the big rains in 2023, we just didn't have to apply as much water. Surface water use, a statement on available water and then the actual use. So next slide. So across the top here, we have a table showing what is available in theory to users in the basin, contractors of the Nacimiento Water Project here and State Water Project here. Based on contract entitlements, doesn't necessarily mean that water is available at that amount every year. And then total surface water use in the basin across the bottom here, we actually had about 20,000 acre feet used by the city of Paso, 2,000 acre feet of Nasi water used by the city of Paso in water year 2023. Technicality is that 632 of those acre feet were put in the ground just over the border into the Atascadero subbasin and then recovered with wells located in the Paso. Well, no, I misspoke. That all happens in the Atascadero Basin, but then served to customers in the Paso Basin. So that's and then this next column here, imported Salinas River underflow. This is water recovered from wells in the Atascadero subbasin under the water right regulated by the State Water Resources Control Board and served to customers in the Paso Basin. We had 0 state water use in 2023, so the total of about 4,500. Next slide. So total water use, this next slide is just going to show you a table that sums everything up that I just presented to you by water use sector across the top and water source. So 68,300 acre feet is the total water use estimate in water year 2023. Next. Changing groundwater and storage. I'll show you a map indicating changing groundwater elevations from the previous year to this year. And we'll show you how that equates to changing groundwater and storage. Again, this is just in the Paso Robles formation. We don't have enough data to do the same calculation in the alluvial aquifer at this point. So this map is showing change in Paso Robles formation water levels from fall of 2022 to fall of 2023. And this data is based on almost 60 wells. Many of them are confidential or subject to well confidentiality agreements. So I'm not showing their locations on this map, but we do in fact have quite a bit of data informing this map. The colors more towards the blue end of the spectrum are increases. I think down here in this corner near Creston, we're looking at 30 to 40 feet of increase in fall 2023 compared to the prior fall. And, largely throughout this Creston area and the upper reaches of the San Juan Creek here. And then honestly, like throughout a lot of the basin, we had increases in water levels with a few areas of slight decline. Next slide. So in water year 2023, those change in water elevations equated to 120,700 acre feet gain in groundwater and storage in the basin. So pretty good year for us. Something to note though, here's all the history of prior water year changes in storage. These green bars indicate those for each specific year. And then this red line is a cumulative of those changes in storage. So, you know, we had a good year here, but the overall trend is still downward. So we got to celebrate the celebrate the battles and keep focused on the forward. Speaking of which, progress towards sustainability. So as I said, you know, despite a great year and, you know, another good one coming along here in water year 2024, you know, we still do have a long-term decline in groundwater elevations and an associated decline in groundwater and storage. So that's a problem we're still trying to solve. Many projects and management actions are already underway with the ultimate goal of reducing groundwater pumping and achieving groundwater sustainability by 2024. Next slide. So some of the basin-wide management actions and projects that are ongoing. One accomplishment last year is we performed a synoptic stream flow survey in April of 2023. Briefly, that's just while the creeks were running, we went out and measured stream flow in several transects and were able to calculate either gaining or losing reaches between those points of measurement. So that's really critical data for understanding surface water groundwater interaction and will inform a groundwater model update as part of the 5-year update, I would expect. Expand monitor network, progress made there. There's a TAC formed, and a work product came out of that actually just after the end of the water year, but we have a recommended path forward there. Miller program, TAC was formed there with meetings in progress. And next slide. Some area specific things, City of Paso Robles and San Miguel CSD recycled water projects are underway and making progress. The blended water project that also had a TAC formed, and there were meetings in progress there. And there actually were 2 instances of diversion of flood flows to recharge groundwater that occurred in water year 2023, one in the San Juan River near Shannon and another on the Estrella River near Paso Robles Airport. And that is all I have.
Let's open it up for public comment, and then we may bring you back, Nate, if there's questions from the committee. The public comment on this item 15, Mr. Graywall.
Yes, thank you, Greg Graywall. I guess I'm one of the only guys that commented. I sent in a bunch of comments that dealt with different things. One of the answers that came back was, I commented about the Nacimiento pipeline. And they said, well, the problem with the break that's consistent right now is below the Paso Robles area, is past Atascadero. It doesn't mention the other repairs that are north of Paso Robles that reduce the capacity in the pipe by 3,909 acre feet of water. You put a 2-foot pipe in a 3-foot pipe as a temporary fix. So you can't get 100% of what you want. You have 5,000 acre feet of water that's not over 5,000. It hasn't been able to go to City of San Luis. It's a contractor that nobody's put to beneficial use. You don't have a carryover provision for Nacimiento. You don't use it, you lose it. So instead of giving it away up here, you let it go to Monterey or to the ocean because nobody wants to pay for the pumping. You can dump it in the river. The only reason we're getting the recharge from the river is because San Luis, the city, can't steal enough water since we got rain. Again, what are the total acres of the 4 golf courses? What water duty factor are you using for the turf? For pasture, you claim 4.8 or 4.9, but you don't show that on the irrigation of the golf courses for whatever size they are. Where you show the crops that we have in our upper area, the water duty factor should be next to that crop. You can't change it because now you added, instead of 1.25 for vineyards, you changed it to 1.5 because you're calculating some evaporation off the ponds. If they're supposed to be using 1.25, How can you up it to 1.5 because they have evaporation? You told other people they couldn't use the water. They should be using less, not more. Maybe it's time to cover those ponds. The Salinas River, that's a big recharge for interconnectivity. You don't show the population. Out of all the wells that Paso Robles has, a majority of the water, if you look at over there, is coming from the Atascadero subbasin. So all that surface water, which is not basin water, is not coming from our basin. It's coming from the Atascadero basin, which was separated. Yeah, it's nice to look at the total water use, but we're supposed to be managing the basin. You should be showing how much is actually coming from the basin. That should be the key element here. And not using, if you look back at when we started this report 7 years, but the National Pipeline came on in 2015. Just go back 7. Those partners have wasted 10 to 12,000 acre feet of Nacimiento water for this total time that hasn't been put to beneficial use. That's unacceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Graywell. Any other public comment on item 15? Mr. Powell.
Murray Powell again. I'd like to jump over to a couple of comments in the draft here. They're actually on page of the actual draft plan 49 through 51, or in your packet, page 150 through 152. Some of you know I was on the monitoring committee, the TAC monitoring committee. So I have a question. Do these committees still exist? Because the last meeting we had was actually a special one I called for October, and there's been none since. And I haven't seen any notices for the expanded, the blended water or the Miller ones either. And this report likes to brag about having these committees and all the work that's been done. And there hasn't been very much work done. And just looking at our monitoring committee, you know, we did, this report indicates 3 meeting dates. We had many more meetings than that. We started in the middle of March, and we had meetings every other week until at least, I think, September, more or less. So that's incomplete. And then at the end, the last meeting we had on our committee, we came up with a list, I think it was 131 wells. And that was in September. And then on October 13th, we got a report, GSI report, draft report that I got right here, and I'll give it to you. 14-page report on what the committee did. And one of the attachment on this report showed 151 wells, not the 131 or 134 wells that our committee had approved. And I actually asked Nate yesterday, and I know I didn't give him enough time to respond, but I was wondering, and this is a draft, so I was wondering if there was a final report after we had our special meeting and if there were any adjustments, but he didn't have time to, he said there was one, but he didn't even know if there was any changes. But my point here is that these committees have been totally ineffective, in my opinion. The actual spreadsheet we came up with that you guys should have, 2 of them you should have, is weren't even generated by us.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Any other public comment on item 15? Okay, seeing none, I will bring it back to the committee for questions or discussion.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's a remarkable undertaking. My thanks to all who have participated. I mean, been through this in other water basins. I know getting these annual reports together is not a small task. I think it covers what needs. I appreciate staff's responsiveness to the questions that were relevant, and understand from Mr. Reilly improvements made. So appreciate that. And if there's no questions from my colleagues, I'd move that we direct staff to submit it for their recommendation.
Questions, comments, seconds?
Just
Mr. Berkeley?
A lot of information. I really enjoyed it, but it was a very, very interesting read. So all the tables and all the information about, the usage and the recharge, how accurate? I mean, what's the level of accuracy on this? I mean, give or take, ballpark.
It's well, it depends on what the data specifically is you're asking about, but I'll say that everything is completed within best professional practices.
Right. So like just the water use table.
So water use, I would say that the municipal numbers are probably better than, they're probably like almost 100% accurate, right?
Okay.
95, whatever. Yeah,
but like
it's metered.
Right, but the big
Right.
numbers are like, agriculture.
The big number is the ag, yeah, and that's one that we're improving on every year, if you ask my opinion. We've pivoted away from like a spreadsheet-based soil water balance model, and now we're relying on satellite information, which captures a lot more nuance spatially throughout the basin. It's a measurement of ET, and we had a little discussion about this earlier today, but as Supervisor Gibson pointed out, there's a very, recognized and dependable relationship between ET, which is, consumption, the consumption of water, tying that back to applied water. And all you got to do is think about what portion of that ET was supplied by effective precipitation. A little easier said than done, but there's methods for that. And then also irrigation system inefficiencies. So, what water was spilled on the ground between it being pumped out of the ground and it getting to the crop. So it's really those two things. And I stand behind those numbers. I think they're as good as they can be without ground truthing. And this is actually why I'm a big fan of Land IQ coming in, because they provide another step. They'll actually work with people who have metering and refine that estimation even further.
Thank you.
Trust but verify, basically. Yeah.
I have a motion, looking for a second.
Second for him.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Item 16, Mr. Reilly.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I'll start off and then Mr. Reilly will add in. So just a reminder, on February 7th, the PBCC, this committee approved the below budget development schedule that's on the slide and directed the GSA staff to refine the fiscal year 24-25 budget that was presented in a draft form at that February 7th meeting. The PBCC GSA staff met in early March to finalize the draft fiscal year 24-25 budget. I'll get to that on the next slide. And the ask of this committee is to recommend individual GSAs approve the fiscal year 24-25 PBCC budget. Just a refresher on the schedule you guys approved. You can see on the screen today we're here in the end of March, and that's the end of the quote unquote budget development cycle. At this meeting, again, we're asking for a recommendation for individual GSAs to approve. We would then have a couple months for GSA boards to adopt that fiscal year budget ahead of the July 1 fiscal year start date. that's the schedule, and then going to the budget. This is in your packet. The items circled in the black bar is the fiscal year 24-25 period. The first portion, the top portion of this budget are grant funded cost components. And again, we've discussed the schedule of that previously in the presentation, but really the items that would be subject to a cost share is the second portion where it says PBCC funded cost components. And that's numbers on rows 11 through 21. Changes from what we presented in February, again, the refinements from staff. I would note that the outreach item costs were reduced from $125,000 to $75,000. Again, if you looked back, that you'd see that change. The other changes are the only other changes to these numbers is in the administrative portion of this budget towards the bottom, and that's row item 16 through 21. You can see that the staff is recommending that we leave in costs to develop a governance structure, but all the cost components 17 through 21 have been removed at this time. And the thought is we need to get governance structure. We have the ET study going on, the rate study, and again, it's too early to include those costs at this time. Again, so the cost you're looking at for the cost share is $600,000. From February, that budget had a $1.1 million that's been reduced from 1.1 to 600,000. And the cost shares, corresponding cost shares for each GSA are shown in rows A through E at the bottom of this budget. And I'll turn it over to Director. Did you have? Yeah. Okay. And that's our report.
Thank you. Let's go out first for public comment. Any public comment on this item 16? Mr. Powell.
Apologize for getting in the weeds here. I was a CPA for 20 years, and actually my specialty was not taxes. It was more financial reviews like this as to what makes up these budgets and how things get handled. So it'd be interesting. I assume they're going to have more detail on this later on, if I'm understanding these timelines, which I'm not sure I am. But I assume there'll be some more adjustments made to these. For example, right at the top, there's a ET Ag usage program for 120. I think that's not exactly the kind of numbers you guys were throwing around a little while ago on that program, just as an example. Going down to the PVC funded cost components, which have to be apparently funded by the GSAs. I see that there's another line item for ET water usage for not this coming fiscal year, but the year after. So I assume all that's going to get somehow more broken down and adjusted to show what makes up the components of that. The one that I am most interested in is the, can't even find it now. There was one here for legal fees, I believe. So it sounded like to me that legal counsel, yeah, it's down there about 4 lines from the bottom of that middle graph there. So it sounds like you're not going to hire your own legal counsel for this group until 2025 and 2026. Is that the way I read this? Because when you start talking about having to draft access agreements to get on wells to monitor and so on, doesn't that have to be done by an independent legal firm that and not the county? Because I assume, and now the only legal expertise we have is county counsel. And I don't even believe that they are independent enough to even be representing any of you guys. So there needs to be a big breakdown on this so-called proposed budget with more details as who the staff are and how much everybody makes and so on. So I hope to see more information shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Any additional public comment on item 16? Seeing none, bring it back to the committee for discussion. Comments, questions?
Make a motion to have HHGSA go ahead and review and approve separately.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Recommendation passes. Item 17, each committee member or agency staff has an opportunity to provide an update. I'll go first. I don't have an update this meeting from Shannon San Juan.
Christopher, we have anything going? Didn't think so. All right, thank you.
We're updated.
We're updated. We're all updated.
Moving on to item 18, Mr. Blakesley.
Thank you, Chair. Just a reminder that their next regular meeting is scheduled for May 22nd.
Thank you. Any future items that committee members want to make sure are agendized for that meeting or subsequent meetings?
We did have a note that the was it the monitoring? Let's see, which one was it? It was update on the state water feasibility is in develop. That RFP is in development. We should be seeing the results of that. We also had directed eventually a preparation of a communications and outreach program. I'd be interested to know how we're doing on that.
Correct. And I think that timing would be appropriate for that next meeting, to bring those in front of you.
Okay. Item 20, Mr. Reilly, any correspondence that we've received?
Nothing.
Okay, well, with that, we will adjourn the meeting at 6:34. Thank you.
All right, okay. Well, be careful if you go down tomorrow.